You're a governor, a conquered city, somewhere in the empire. The king has summoned you. You're waiting outside his throne room. On the wall in front of you, there's a carving. Stone relief, beautiful craftsmanship. It shows a man, kneeling, soldiers around him. One of them has a knife, and he's peeling the man's skin off while he's alive. You can see it in the carving, the mouth open, screaming. Next panel, pyramids, but not stone. Heads, severed heads, thousands of them stacked like bricks. Next panel, a city burning, children on stakes, families being separated, chained together in long lines. You look at the inscription carved below. It's the last governor who sat where you're sitting, the one who disagreed with the king. Then, suddenly a faint voice echoes from throne room. The king will see you now. That's not a horror movie. That's a business meeting in the Assyrian Empire.
Let's establish something first. Where and when we are. If you're looking at a modern map, we're talking about Iraq, Syria, parts of Turkey, Iran, Egypt. But 2,700 years ago, around 700 BCE, this region looked very different. Here's who mattered in this world. Assyria, northern Iraq, around modern Mosul, that's where our story focuses. Babylon, southern Iraq, near modern Baghdad, ancient, wealthy, culturally sophisticated. Think of them like Athens in the Greek world. Everyone admired their culture. Egypt, still Egypt, past its glory days, but rich, powerful, always a major player. The Medes, northwestern Iran, tough mountain peoples, Indo-European tribes that would eventually unify into a kingdom. Elam, southwestern Iran, ancient civilization, powerful, and, as you'll see, sometimes ruled by absolute lunatics. Then you had smaller kingdoms in what's now Israel, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, cities and tribal confederations that all had to deal with the big powers.
This world had been running for thousands of years. Cities, trade routes, diplomacy, wars, treaties, betrayals. Think of it like Europe in 1900. Multiple powerful states, complex alliances, everyone jockeying for position. Except one of these powers, Assyria, figured out how to dominate all the others. Not through superior culture, not through better diplomacy, through systematic, calculated, advertised terror. And they did it for over 1,000 years. Here's Assyria's situation. Their homeland, the area around the cities of Ashur and Nineveh, had no natural defenses, no mountains, no deserts, no great rivers protecting them. They were surrounded by peoples who wanted what they had, or wanted them dead, or both. To survive, the Assyrians became the toughest military power in the region. Their army was the army, the best infantry the Middle East ever produced, cavalry, chariots, siege equipment. By 700 BCE, they could field armies of 50,000 men. That's a football stadium full of soldiers, marching hundreds of miles, supplied, fed, organized. More advanced than anything Europe would manage for another 1,000 years. But here's the problem. They conquered an empire, huge, dozens of different peoples, hundreds of cities, from Egypt to Persia. But they had one major army. If rebellions broke out in 2 places at once, they couldn't handle it. The army could only be in one place at a time. So they needed a way to keep conquered peoples from rebelling in the first place. They needed fear. No, they needed terror. That's a better word. Not just defeat, not just occupation. Fear so deep that people wouldn't even think about resisting. And they invented a system to create it.
First step of their system? Remove identity.
When the Assyrians conquered a region, they didn't just kill people. That's inefficient. They moved them. Entire populations, tens of thousands of people at a time, ripped from their homeland and moved hundreds of miles away to some completely different part of the empire. You're a farmer in what's now Syria. You speak Aramaic. Your family has worked this land for generations. You worship local gods at local temples. The Assyrian army conquers your city. They don't massacre you. They round you up, all of you, your entire city, and they march you to Elam, 1,000 miles away. Different language, different gods, different everything. Meanwhile, the Assyrians are taking some people from Elam and moving them to Syria, to your land, to your house. Do you see what this does? You can't rebel. You don't speak the language of the people around you. You don't know the territory. You have no support network, no temples, no tribal connections. You're isolated, powerless. And the people who moved into your homeland, they feel the same way. This wasn't random cruelty. This was social engineering. We have the records. The Assyrians moved populations like we move freight. They kept lists, quotas. I'll read from one of these records that was found. 27,290 people from Damascus relocated to the Zagros Mountains. 18,430 people from Elam relocated to Samaria. End quote. The biblical lost tribes of Israel, they're lost because of this system. The Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel and scattered the population across the empire. Gone. Just gone. But deportation was just the first part of the system. The second part was worse.
Every spring, the Assyrian king would call up the army, and they would go on campaign. Sometimes they had a real war to fight, some new enemy, some major rebellion. But most years, they just went to steal things. Yep, you heard that right. Imagine the USA president ordering the entire army to enter a city and start stealing. I know some of you guys are thinking, Chronicle Sage, the government are already taking our stuff. Instead of the army, they send the IRS. Back to our story. The Assyrian Empire ran on plunder. Conquered territories paid annual tribute: gold, silver, grain, horses, cattle, timber, people. But that wasn't enough. The army had become essential to the economy. They needed it to bring back wealth every year. So even if there was no major war, the king would take the army to some conquered territory and just take their stuff. Armed robbery at a state level. Here's what one small raid netted, just one, against one minor opponent. 40 chariots with horses, 460 additional horses, 280 pounds of silver, 280 pounds of gold, 6,000 pounds of lead, 6,000 pounds of copper, 18,000 pounds of iron, 1,000 copper vessels, 2,000 copper pans, assorted furniture, 2,000 cattle, 5,000 sheep, 15,000 slaves, daughters of noblemen with dowries, the ruler's sister. One raid, one minor target. Now imagine you're one of those conquered peoples. Every single year, the Assyrian army shows up, takes your wealth, takes your people, takes your children as slaves or tribute. And you can't fight back because you've seen what happens to people who fight back. Which brings us to the third part of the system of terror.
The Assyrian kings didn't just brutalize rebels, they advertised it. Those stone carvings we talked about, they were everywhere. Palace walls, temple walls, city gates. If you came to Nineveh, the Assyrians' capital city, on a diplomatic mission, you walked through gates decorated with images of impaled prisoners and pyramids of heads. If you waited to see the king, you saw carvings of people being flayed alive. This wasn't accidental. This was the message. This is what happens if you resist.
And just in case the pictures weren't clear enough, they wrote it down. King Ashur-Nasirpal II, one of the most brutal Assyrian kings, carved this into his palace walls. "I built a pillar over the city gate, and I flayed all the chiefs who had revolted, and I covered the pillar with their skin. Some I walled up within the pillar, some I impaled upon the pillar on stakes. Some I maimed captives with fire. From some I cut off their noses, their ears, their fingers. I put out the eyes of many. I made one pillar of the living and another of heads." End quote. He had his throne brought out to watch. When people were being skinned alive, the king watched. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. Centuries later, King Ashurbanipal, after crushing the Elamites, wrote this: "For a distance of a month and 25 days' journey, I devastated the provinces of Elam. Salt and prickly plants I scattered over them. The noise of the people, the tread of cattle and sheep, the glad shouts of rejoicing, I banished from its fields." End quote. He wanted silence. Not just victory, not just defeat, complete, total silence. When his army brought back the head of the Elamite king, Ashurbanipal hung it from a tree in his garden, so he could look at it while he feasted. One historian said, "Assyrian war reliefs have no parallel anywhere in human history." Another said that when King Sennacherib destroyed Babylon for rebelling, he did it as thoroughly as a nuclear bomb. Except a nuclear bomb is instant. Sennacherib's soldiers did it by hand, with hammers and torches and muscle, for weeks. They diverted the Euphrates River to flood the city, pulled down the walls stone by stone, burned everything, salted the earth so nothing would grow. Then Sennacherib gathered the sacred dirt from Babylon's temples and sent it as gifts to foreign kings, to humiliate them even in annihilation. This was the system: deportation to destroy identity, robbery to fund the state, terror to prevent rebellion. And it worked for over 1,000 years.
Here's what's fascinating and horrible. The Assyrian terror system was efficient. From a cold strategic perspective, some historians argue it made sense. You have one army, a massive empire, dozens of conquered peoples who hate you. Option 1, garrison every city, keep soldiers everywhere. Impossibly expensive, leaves you weak everywhere. Option 2, make rebellion so horrifying that no one tries it. Cheaper, more effective. Because fear becomes your garrison. Terror becomes your police force in every city. And for 1,000 years, the Assyrians broke their enemies so thoroughly that even after Assyria fell, those peoples stayed broken. When the Persian Empire took over after Assyria collapsed, historians point out something interesting. The Persians didn't need to be as brutal. The peoples of the Middle East had been beaten into submission by Assyria. The Persians inherited a docile region. The Elamites, once powerful, numerous, fierce, had been shattered by centuries of Assyrian campaigns. The Babylonians had been destroyed and rebuilt so many times they were exhausted. The Assyrians broke the Middle East to the leash of empire, and the Middle East stayed broken. Some historians even argue that when Alexander the Great conquered Persia 300 years after Assyria fell, one reason it went so easily was because the region had never recovered its fighting spirit. The Assyrian shadow was that long. But here's the thing about ruling through terror. It works until it doesn't, because while fear can make people obey, it can't make them forget. Every time the Assyrian army rode into Babylon, the Babylonians remembered what King Sennacherib had done. Every time the Medes paid tribute, they remembered the deportations. Every time the Elamites saw an Assyrian governor, they remembered the devastation. The Assyrians had created an empire, but they'd also created something else. A waiting list of vengers. Everyone who had been flayed, everyone who had been deported, everyone who had been robbed. They were all waiting for Assyria to show weakness, waiting for a chance. And in 640 BCE, they got it.
640 BCE. Assyria is at the peak of power. King Ashurbanipal has just conquered Egypt, the eternal kingdom. His library at Nineveh holds tens of thousands of texts. His palaces are unmatched. His armies are invincible. He calls himself King of the world, King of Assyria, King of the four corners of the earth. If you lived in 640 BCE, Assyria looked eternal. But Ashurbanipal is old and sick, and he knows something the world doesn't know yet. In his later writings, he sounds different, worried, almost paranoid. He writes, "I did well unto God and man, to dead and living. Why have sickness and misery befallen me? I cannot do away with the strife in my country and the dissensions in my family. Disturbing scandals oppress me always. Death is seizing hold upon me." End quote. And long silence. When Ashurbanipal dies, his sons will do what Assyrian princes always do. They'll fight each other for the throne. The army will split, the empire will weaken. But all those peoples who have been waiting, remembering, hating, they'll see their chance. 28 years after Ashurbanipal's death, Assyria won't exist anymore. Not diminished, not defeated, erased forever.